All right. I think this is happening. I think it's happening. I've got the inner ears in to make the my Instagram, which I'm doing on my iPad, a little bit more awesome. Hopefully the sound is amazing. Let me just put these. Let me just do a little thing here with my iPads. I need it to be a little bit more. There we go. Now I can hear myself. That's better. All right. And then also Facebook. Hi. Ooh, my goodness. Here we go. This is some live office hours with me, Dr. Shannon Coates. I'm coming to you live from a little town that is north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. And these are the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, Bewaki. Oh my gosh, I've been practicing and I haven't quite conquered some of these yet. The Mississauga and the Wendat and Neo-Wencio peoples. And today we're going to do a little, what's the word? We're going to do a little build. Oh, and I need to pull out. Sorry. I thought I was prepared and then I was not. So here we are. I wasn't as prepared as I thought. So today we're going to do a little build on the where is it? I'm so sorry. I'm going to do a little build, little explanation, a little moving farther into the post that we put up a couple days back, talking about some of the ways, or I framed it as some of the red flags, because red flags is super trendy right now. Some of the red flags to know if you may be teaching a more teacher-centered lesson than you might want to, right? And one of the things that I said in the copy on that post, one of the things that I talked about in the copy was the fact that so many of us did not have student-led learning modeled for us. I did certainly with some voice teachers, and with some voice teachers I did not. So I had a lot of voice teachers through my teenage years. I had several voice teachers for various reasons. I had to keep moving on. And so some modeled that better than others, but also keeping in mind that I was taking voice lessons in the late 80s, early 90s. Oh, so it's going back a ways. So some of these things were not being discussed or even coming into the educational system yet, right? Many of these things were not coming in, many of these concepts around student-led learning and, understanding more cooperative learning, and these less sort of behaviorist kind of philosophies. These things were not being implemented very much in the certainly not in our academic system so much, and so then they weren't really coming into the independent voice studio. And we have there's a large culture of coaching now as well, therapy and coaching and different models of how to interact with people and how to, we understand learning so much better now, and we understand motor learning so much better now. So none of these things were as readily available when I was taking voice lessons, of course. And so in some ways, some of these things were modeled for me, but in many ways they were not. And so one of the things that happens is that we have really great intentions, and we are great teachers, and we might have really great intentions. And I'm just realizing that I'm sorry that I'm so the light is so blue. it's so cool on Facebook. So I apologize. I look even whiter than normal. What do you know? Okay. So we get these. We never had these things modeled, is what I'm saying. So then how would we know that there is another way, right? The other thing that happens for us is we're terrific voice teachers. We have great intentions, so we're trying to teach in the best way we can. And our singers are progressing. So the singers we work with, are moving forward and are singing better by some standard, and perhaps they are, they're winning festivals, they're getting auditions, they're doing the singing that they want to do. So that then, or maybe the majority of them are, or maybe, some of them are. And so then we never then, or rarely, we may not then have that same kind of need for self-reflection on our teaching. We may not want to have that kind of reflection on our teaching because the system doesn't seem to be broken, so why fix it, Some of the other reasons we don't, that great teachers with the best of intentions will often teach a teacher-centered lesson versus a student-centered lesson or a learner-centered lesson is they just haven't, and this is quite common. This is part of the reason that I started the VoicePed Undegree. Is that so often voice teachers, when I'm working with voice teachers, so often what happens is, we talk about a principle, we talk about a way of interacting, we talk about a way of supporting learning, we talk about reasons for supporting learning. Hi Bella, hi Liz Jackson Hearns. We talk about these reasons for supporting learning and ways to support learning. And then we talk about the practical application of that, and voice teachers go, oh, I didn't know that I could do that. I didn't realize that was a thing. I didn't even know. And so often these things just aren't made explicit, right? And so often we hear someone like me, for example, or someone somewhere in pedagogy or in teaching saying things like, yeah, we've got to do student-led learning, but then not making it explicit what that looks like in the voice studio, right? Or we hear like, yes, universal design, or we hear like backward design, or we hear like all of these big pedagogical terms, and we're like, that sounds amazing, and I understand the philosophical reasons or the underpinnings of that pedagogy and the reason why we might teach that way, and right, but then no one says, and so this is what that looks like in practical application in the voice studio. No one says, specifically, here are the ways that you can do this. So voice teachers, again, great intentions and want to do their best and are like, I love my students. I want to make sure that they have all of the options. I'm trying to support their learning, and still back in the way of working with singers that isn't where they feel like they're philosophically on board, but that isn't coming out in the practical teaching just because it hasn't been made explicit for them, or they haven't been given permission to do it in a different way. This is very similar. I'll just do a little Michelle Markwart Deveaux shout out, can I? This is what happened for me in terms of my business. No one had ever modeled business and how to do voice teaching except for hourly rates, one-on-one voice teachers, punitive, makeup lessons, punitive scheduling, punitive makeup lessons. Like no one had ever modeled anything other than that for me, right? I'd only ever seen that. And so then when I started to work with Michelle, and she was like, oh no, you believe this thing, don't you? Yes. So then what does that look like in the voice studio? And kind of gave me permission and showed and was like, here are so many other options around the business things especially. And I was like, oh, no one had ever made that explicit before, that's what that could look like, right? So anyway, that's one of the things. That's part of the reason that I developed the VoicePed Undegree as well, is just I wanted to have a place where we can make these things explicit, how to do this teaching in the voice studio. What does this look like? The other thing that often stops us from teaching in a way that aligns with what we actually truly believe, we believe these things, but then our teaching doesn't actually align with that, is that we don't often have a community, right, to go to where we can kind of bounce these ideas off of each other, and where we can ask questions and be open with each other. So we have some maybe like online, in the more recent past, of course, we've started to have like online groups like Facebook, Facebook groups and those kinds of things. But like the academic system is pretty well known for not being super open and friendly and collegial in terms of like, hey, what are you trying in the voice studio? How does this look like in your voice studio? Right? It's not super well known for that. I'm sure there are exceptions, but not super well known for that kind of collegiality. And especially those of us who came through that academic system, we kind of picked that up as well, where like, I need to do this, right? And the other people in the town are my like competitors. And also then if I, so often on the Facebook groups, if I like go onto Facebook and I ask a question that is anybody else doing X, Y, Z? What do people do about this? Sometimes it's you get eaten alive in those groups. Not always, but sometimes you do, right? So again, I'm just going to do a lot of shout outs for Michelle right now, but again, groups like SECO, the SpeakEasy Cooperative, where people can come together in that supportive way to have this community where we can have this dialogue around, I'm trying this thing. What does everybody think? And again, that's why I started the VoicePed Undegree as well, is this supportive community where we can be in and out of each other's studios and modeling, but also experimenting and being creative and trying the stuff out, right? Applying the stuff. And it's not just me telling you how to do the thing. It's me saying, what happens if? How does this look for you? What do you all think? What are you doing about this, right? So that's that. Anyway, that community isn't always there. And then the last thing is that sometimes we just don't know that we're not teaching as effectively as we could be, right? We just don't know. And so then until we try it and we're like, oh, that's actually so much better. What do you know? Okay. So let me talk about some of these red flags. Let's just talk about a few of those. Yes, Liz. So Liz is saying, my heart. That vulnerability and creativity is so important to model learning for our students. Yes, that's the thing that our students lose, right? When we're in this mindset of like, I can't reach out, I can't, we're this sort of like teaching island to ourselves. What does that model to the folks we're working with? I mean, it models that like, it actually also models a little bit of a fixed mindset too, right? Like there's a fixed mindset aspect to that of like, I'm doing the thing, and growth mindset says that, we're all learning and we can get better. And there's, so I think that, it's not a great learning model for students, not a great way to model learning. All right. So some of these red flags, some of these things to consider, seeing in your own teaching, understanding in your own teaching, and experimenting a little bit with some of these things. Yeah. If we're choosing all of the rep and all of the exercises for the singers we work with, if we are in charge of all of that, we're missing learning opportunities, right? We're missing opportunities to support learners. That is teacher-centered. I have all of the information. I know all of the good things for you. And you are going to learn how to choose your own repertoire and forever are going to be dependent on me to choose your exercises and repertoire, or dependent on someone else to choose exercises and repertoire for you. This is challenging when especially if we've come through a Western academic system, if we've been in, those of us in Canada especially and also in England and in Australia, hi colonies, where we are talking about, where we are very familiar with a system of syllabi that lays out the appropriate repertoire for your age and stage of development. So we're very familiar with that system. And so we kind of take on this arbiter. We become the arbiter of the singers who we're working with. We become their voice in terms of, what repertoire they're allowed to sing and what's good for them. And I'm not saying that we should never not choose anything for singers, the singers we work with. I'm just saying that if we are always doing that, and if we are teaching singers that someone else is going to be in charge of your repertoire, even if we're explaining to them as we go. So even if we're saying, hey, I think this song is going to be terrific for you. It's going to show XYZ. It's going to show XYZ. You're going to work on these 3 things in it, and it's going to expand your range. It's going to do blah blah blah. And I think you're really going to love it. So even if we're explaining the choices in repertoire, and even if we're working toward helping them to understand why, even then we can go farther. We can go farther into student-led learning. How can we go farther into student-led learning? What repertoire do you love? What songs do you want to sing? What songs don't you want to sing? Amazing. What don't you like about this song? What do you love about this song? What do you love about singing this song? What don't you love about singing this song? Is there something in you? Understanding, asking the questions that allow the singers we're working with to have self-assessment skills. So as we're supporting the singers we're working with, if it's student-led, we are supporting them and we're helping them as they develop the skills. Melissa, I love that question too. What energy would you like to put out in the world? Yes. What do you have to say, and what do you want to put out there, right? We're supporting them as they start to learn how to do self-assessment, and as they start to learn for themselves what's good for them, right? And what they want. What stories, yeah, exactly, Liz saying it's a very similar thing to Liza, right? What stories do you or don't you want to tell? Cis-het normativity, exactly. So what happens when I, as a cis-het person, as a white person, as a woman, all of the things, what happens when I choose all of the repertoire for you? What happens? I give you my worldview. You're welcome. These are all the things that are going to be great for you to sing. I give you all of the things that I think are important for you to put out in the world. Oops. What do I want to do instead? What is student-led? Student-led is, what energy do you want to put out in the world? What stories do you want to tell? What are the things that resonate with you and your experience of life? What do you want your voice to be? What do you want to communicate? What's your message for the world? Those things. And then we talk about, like, what do you love? What don't you love? And what are some of the other things you might learn in this music, right? What are some of the pedagogical underpinnings, if you will, by singing, that you might learn by singing this music? So again, coming back to maybe a more Western classical standpoint, like, what are some of the things that you see in this melody that might be challenging, or that you're going to love learning about? And maybe they say, oh, well, I can see that this melody is super fluid. I think I'm going to learn more about legato. Amazing. Yeah, I think you might. Let's see what happens. So that then gives them tools to choose how they want to show up in the world in terms of what their singing is. And it also gives them self-assessment tools with, like, what do I like? I'm going to talk about exercises in just a minute when I talk about this. So we come into a voice lesson, or singers come into the voice lesson, and we say to them, have you warmed up today? Have you sung today? Would you like to warm up? Great. Go back and look in my live office hours for, like, warm up. I've done some stuff on warm ups and what I think the value of them is. So just, like, take a look at that. I have some things to say about warm ups, but whatever. So whatever, we say, hey, have you sung yet today? Great. And then they say, no, I haven't sung yet today, or yeah, I really feel like I want to warm up, or I'm going to be singing, like, Caro Mio Ben. And so I feel like all I've done so far today is, I don't know, Rent. All I've done so far today is like rock musical singing, and so, or all I've done so far today is like Sarah McLachlan. All I've done so far today is like singer-songwriter, wispy kind of singing and telling stories in that way. And I know I'm going to be singing. I want to work on Caro Mio Ben, so I should do a classical warm-up. Great. That's some good information. What's the next step? If you're going towards student-led learning, what's the next step? The next step is not that you choose the warm-up that you think is going to work for them. The next step is, what do you feel needs to be warmed up? What needs to be worked on in order for you to successfully accomplish your singing goals in Caro Mio Ben? Caro Mio Ben. That's the next question, right? Not me going like, okay, so we should probably get some like tongue trills, blah, 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 like blah, blah, blah. Okay, what do you think is going to be what's the next step for you? How do you know that you're not warmed up enough? How do you know that you're not ready to sing Caro Mio Ben right now? What about the way you are right now in your voice is telling you that you're not ready to sing it right now and that you want to warm up? Why am I asking that? Because I want them to have the self-assessment tools, right? They need to have the agency to be able to figure out whether or not they're warmed up and to what extent. My next question is, okay, so those are the things that you feel like you want to work on. Terrific. What are some exercises that you feel? What kind of singing would you like to do? What kind of coordination would you like to establish that is going to make you feel like you're warmed up? And then, here's the most important question. How will you know when you're warmed up? How will you know? So what happens usually is the singer comes in and we say, okay, have you warmed up today? Would you like to do some singing? Great. So then I go like, okay, let's do like, you're going to sing Caro Mio Ben later? Perfect. Let's do 1, 3, 5, 8, 5, 3, 1 with a tongue trill, and let's get it nice and swingy, and let's get that breath moving. Terrific. We do that 7 times. We maybe do it in a couple different keys, and then we put the tongue trill onto the tune of Caro Mio Ben. Great. Nothing wrong with that, except, and then I say, do you feel like you're warmed up now? And they say, yes. And what do I mean by do you feel like you're warmed up? I mean, can we get on to the real singing now? Can we do the songs now? That's what I mean, right? And that's what the singer knows is what I mean. But what will happen if I turn that around into student-led learning? What happens? Student-led teaching. I say, let me know when you feel like you're warmed up. And then when they say, yeah, I feel like I'm warm, great. What is letting you know that you're warmed up? How do you know? What can you do now that you couldn't do before? Or what do you feel? What coordinations are coming through now that weren't perhaps coming through before? What is landing now that wasn't landing before? Give me the words. Tell me what's happening. Because what happens? The singers we work with, what do? They go home and they're like, well, I have to warm up. And why do they think they have to warm up? They think they have to warm up because, and they think it's either a time, like I have to warm up for 5 minutes before I sing, or I'm gonna hurt my voice. I have to warm up for 10 minutes. Like they think it's either a timing thing, right? And so I have to sing scales. I have to do blah, blah, blah. And we as voice teachers often, we're just like, okay, yep, we got to do these scales to get your range, and we've got to do these to get your blah, blah. We just give them warm-ups or exercises to do. And so they sang it like they started on middle C and they ended on high C, and so we're warmed up. What makes you know that you are warmed up? Because then the singers have, if we are supporting them to know and to actually do this self-assessment work, they have the tools then to be able to do effective warm-ups, to do actually effective warm-ups when they need them. They don't always need them, right? I would argue lots of times they don't actually need a warm-up. What they might need is to work on a technical skill or a coordination, but not actually a warm-up. Anyway, it's fine. So what am I in that student-led learning? What am I supporting and supporting their learning then, rather than just giving them, you've got to sing this 7 times, you've got to sing these scales, you've got to do this, blah, 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 blah. That's also comes back to when I'm choosing all of the exercises for the singer all the time. The singer then comes home or goes into practicing or goes to a gig, and what do they do before they do the gig? They go like, well, these are the warm-ups that my teacher gave me, and so I'm going to do them, and I do them 5 times, and then I know I'm warmed up. All you know is that you sang for 5 minutes. That's all you know. How do I know that I am warmed up? What tells me that I'm ready to do the thing? Okay. Third thing, if we are, sorry, let me just look at the third thing on my list here. Yeah, the teacher explains how to coordinate for desired tonal outcomes. So this comes along with the warm-up, and we've talked about this in other lives as well, but with this idea of like me telling you how to warm up and just giving you the stuff that you need. This is a similar thing, except for it's a little bit more related to motor skills and how we learn motor skills. But the more that I tell you and go through the cognitive, if you will, branch, if you will, of learning, the more I give like direct mechanical directives, the more I give mechanical directives, meaning the more I say things like, do this exercise 7 times, 1, 3, 5, 8, 5, 3, 1, with a tongue trill, or do the slides with the make your mouth like this and find the, or do that again and now make sure that your tongue is doing X, Y. Like the more I give a mechanical directive, or a directive that is telling muscles what to do and telling you what to do and explaining the process of it, the less effective the teaching is. The more that is about me as the teacher downloading information to you, and the less that is about the student discovering the thing. So a more effective way to work with singers, and a more student-led way to work with singers, is to find an upstream directive that will allow them, find a directive, an upstream example of an upstream directive, a very straightforward example of an upstream directive is something like, upstream directive is language I've taken from Heidi Moss, by the way, is something like the hey exercise if we're learning how to do like a middle upper belt, right? Hey! Hey! That's an upstream directive. Am I telling you, increase the pressure, make sure the vocal folds are fully adducted, make sure your vocal tract shape is a little bit more divergent, like all of those things, like lock in the body a little bit, like make sure you're open in this way more. Am I telling you to do all of those things? No. And if I did tell you to do all of those things, if I explained the process to you, it's not very effective. It's very rarely effective. What is far more effective is your friend is across the street and you haven't seen them in a million years, and you're like, hey, hey, and now let's put that on a tune. So we discovered the new coordination. I supported you. I gave you a way to discover the new coordination without telling you how to do the new coordination. And your body, which is a beautiful system of, okay, I'll do whatever you say. If we give it something to do, the body will discover the coordination for you. And then all we have to do is, draw attention to that and build on it. That's all we have to do, because I found that new coordination, and I don't have to continually explain to you how it works, right? That is student-led learning. And the other thing that happens there as well is, as the body learns that new coordination, they can take that back home with them. Oh, my phone keeps. They can take that back home with them, right? They can be like, oh yeah, that new coordination felt like blah, blah, blah. We can also ask questions like, how did you know that was successful? When you say, how did that feel? And they go, oh, it felt really good. Great. What about it felt good? Okay. No, it just felt really free. Okay. How did you know that it was free? We ask these questions. and we start to allow for this self-assessment and this understanding of self-assessment. The fourth red flag is if you as a teacher are determining what a desired tonal outcome is. So we as teachers how did that feel? It's a trap. It's a trap. I know, right? How did that feel? How did that feel is a terrific way in. And we as voice teachers, I'll say, like, I work with voice teachers all the time, right? So we as voice teachers are like, the first step is to start to ask, how did that feel, right? That's the first step. And then so often as voice teachers, we're happy when they say good. And we're like, okay, good. But that's just the first step. It's the trap. So yes, if you're not asking singers how it felt yet, or if you're not asking singers how they experienced it, or if you're not asking for any feedback on their coordination or singing, yes, a great first step is how did that feel? But understand, I think there are more effective ways to ask how did that feel. But whatever, how did that feel is not a bad first step. So long as you make sure that you follow up and you don't let those singers get away with it. It's not that they're getting away with it. It's that you're missing opportunities. You're missing opportunities to support singers as they really understand what happened in their body. And also as they really understand how to get back to that coordination and how to understand whether or not it's still working in the way that they thought it was working, right? This is just a whole missed opportunity when we let them go at yeah, it felt good. Mm-hmm. Or it felt more free. Oh yeah, I really felt like I accessed the breath. How do you know? How do you know you accessed the breath there? What happened in your body how do you know? And as I've talked about before, lots and lots of us are not ready for those kinds of questions. We're not ready to be able to really understand what's happening in our body in that kind of way. So you may want to offer some options in a box, but we're not talking about that today. Okay, teacher determines what constitutes a desired tonal outcome. From the best of our intentions, we listen to a singer and we say, oh, that's an unhealthy one. Let's find a more healthy way to do that. Oh, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know this from listening that it's unhealthy. Mm-hmm. You know this from listening that it's not their choice. You know this from listening that it's not their it's not what they that they wanted to do. You know this. Okay. Without asking, without knowing them at all. Okay. And you decided what was the best way for them to sing a song or to get the thing out. Again, this is particularly rampant in Western classical training simply because the coordination for Western classical training in order to be heard in that way is quite intense. It's quite complex coordination that's required. And so there are other levels of what is going to be the coordination that's going to work most efficiently for specific kinds of sounds, right? So yes, there's definitely some talk about this. But even in Western classical singing, where if you will, the parameters around what kind of sounds are appropriate, I'm putting this on big quotes, what kinds of sounds are appropriate are so much stronger because we're unamplified, and so we need to be able to be heard in a specific way, right? So those coordinations, those coordinations are quite complex to be able to be heard, unamplified, all that stuff. Even in Western classical singing, there's lots of variations about how to do that. Anybody ever seen Cecilia Bartoli sing? Ever seen her? The craziness she does with her face and body when she's singing? There are lots and lots of ways, and I've seen some absolutely fabulous, fascinating watching some wonderful considered world-class singers who are communicating beautifully, doing this just incredible work with their tongue all the way back in their mouth the whole time. What? How's that working? How are they doing that? They're getting the sound they want in the way they want it, and their tongue's all the way back in their mouth. What? even within Western classical singing, there are choices we can make that are ours alone. She is a force of nature. Yes, I think, did we go together, Melissa, to see her? She is a force of nature. Dang nabbit. I feel like we might have gone together to see her. And like, yes! You mean the utter delight and joy that she exudes from her lightning eyeballs? I know! Exactly. And like, before I saw her live, which again, Melissa, maybe we saw that together live. I don't know. But before I saw her live, you know, I was a little judgy. It was Cecilia Bartoli. I was a little judgy because like, oh, I couldn't like see her face. And then seeing her live, dear God, I don't think I could love her more. Oh, okay. Okay. We didn't see that one together. Oh, you went with Alexa Portenko. That's so cool. Yeah, so cool. Fun. Yeah. So like then when you see her live and you think, okay, who gives a crap that she's doing all of this? I am in a freaking joy bubble here. The sheer delight. I'm in this like joy, delight, wrapped in the unbelievable, like, oh, yes. So, like, who cares what she looks like when she sings? Lots of people do care, and lots of people are told not to sing that way in their training. Okay. You don't get to decide what someone else's tonal outcome is. You don't get to decide what is healthy or good for someone else. What we do get to do as voice teachers is offer options. So someone is singing in a way that we are concerned that they may not be able to sustain, right? It might get them to the point where they are not able to sustain that sound. This becomes not about whether it's healthy or not. I've talked about this before too, but this is not about whether or not it's healthy. It's not about whether this is a good sound for you or a bad sound for you. This is about, here are the options. If you want to communicate in this way, fantastic. You may not. Oh yeah, the do no harm narrative, yes. Yeah, why not? Because that also comes down to like me being in charge of the, right? Although maybe I'm not thinking about it the same way that you are, Liz. Maybe toss a little bit in there to let me make sure that we're talking about the same thing. But this comes back to like, I am going to offer the options and you get to make the decisions. Student-led learning is about me offering options and saying, here are all of the possible roadmaps. Choose the one that works for you. You get to have a choose your own adventure. I will support you in all of the things. Oh yes, do no harm doesn't exactly. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going to. Do no harm doesn't have to mean give no choices. Exactly. So do no harm. Yeah, we get caught up in that, right? Like I think it's Miller who talks about do no harm as his like overriding principle in pedagogy. I think it's Miller. Yes, or resisting students' personal exploration because it might do damage. Exactly. Yeah, we take on this role, this paternalistic role, right? So we take on this paternalistic role where we're like, well, I'm just looking out for the best interests of the singer and their voice. I'm like, I just want to make sure I do no harm. Yeah. What you want is to, like, if you're working with student-led, that puts you in the center of the learning. That puts you as the center of the learning, right? That centers you as the primary person in this relationship because you have all of the knowledge and it's your personal responsibility. You become the paternalistic overseer of someone else's voice. And so the way that we work through the do no harm is we say, if we're working with student-led learning and we're student-centered learning, the way that we work through do no harm is we say, do you love the way this sounds? Is this communicating in the way that you want to communicate? Is this the energy you want to put in the world? Is this the story you want to tell and the way you want to tell it? Terrific. Let's explore some other options. Externally, it sounds like there may be more effort involved in this sound than we want. May not be. And externally, Yes, and I'm just making sure it's not my fault and I'm not going to get blamed. Exactly. I don't want to be a bad teacher. Centering me as the person in the relationship, as the primary person. No! What do I say? I say, hey, that sound may not be sustainable over a long period of time. It may be, but it may not be. And so let's find 3 or 4 other ways that feel just as good to you and that communicate the way you want them to, the way you want to communicate. And that may not be, perhaps they aren't doing, perhaps it's not 100% the way you want to communicate. However, let's also find the ways where you can use the sounds you want to use for perhaps shorter periods of time, perhaps for like recordings only, rather than every single time you're on stage, and maybe 60 or 70% of the time. And let's put some parameters around. Here it comes back again. I'm going to support you in figuring out what feels good to you. How do you know when you are at your limit, right? Yeah, Seth is saying, when we have cultivated a culture of asking for students' opinions and honoring their perspectives, I have found that they almost always just volunteer the info, like that didn't feel too great, or I loved that. Yes. So then, and I would say as well, Seth, like, as I was just about to like kind of articulate, I would say as well, when they say that didn't feel too great, why? How do you know it didn't feel great? That felt like there was too much tension. How do you know it was too much tension? What about it was too much tension for you? And then then we can also start to put some, or I loved that, amazing. What did you love about it? It felt like XYZ, terrific. How did you know it felt XYZ? What in your body is like, what about it? How are you making it that it feels like XYZ? Didn't feel too great. Okay. What about it didn't feel too great? Felt like I was working too hard. How do you know you were working too hard? All these like questions, right? So again, rather than us saying, don't do that, that's bad for your voice, or oh no, don't do that, what do we say? We say, how's it feel? What are you trying to explore here? What would you like to say? How are you trying to use your voice in this way? What is happening in your voice? Do you love it? On a scale of 1 to 10, is it your favorite? Like 10 being your favorite, 1 being your least favorite. Why is it at a 7? Socrates has entered the chat. How do you know it feels? I know. Well, my somatic therapist has entered the chat, to be perfectly honest. She is constantly like, I'm like, oh yeah, that feels more released. And then she's like, how do you know? And I'm like, stop asking me these questions. I don't want to know. Anyway. But it's so relevant for singing. How do you know? Again, how do you know when you're warmed up? How do you know that you're warmed up? How do you know that you're ready to sing XYZ? How do you know? Okay, I'm gonna ask those questions. Okay, fifth red flag. Boop, boop, boop. I just have to pull up my phone. The teacher talks more than the student sings. Which is rich coming from me, who I've been talking now for like 45 minutes. Rich, I tell ya. Yep, that is a big red flag for a teacher-centered lesson, right? As the saying goes, the person who is speaking is the person who is learning. And I'm learning right now. Christina, the evil laughs. I'm learning tons, and I do also learn. I learn by talking about stuff, of course, and we all do. We learn by sort of, not everyone learns this way, but lots and lots of us learn by, kind of talking it out and sort of externally processing, and that's great to know about yourself. And also, you should be a lecturer then. You should not be a voice teacher. Oh gosh, because especially when it comes to teaching voice, And so I've talked about this before too. When I was teaching in my graduate voice ped program, and we were teaching, and we were we had mentors, and my mentor, Lorna McDonald, was observing. She observed as we taught, and the two things that were sort of like my nemesis all the time. One, I talk too fast. Because I just want to get all the information out. I just want to support you and give you all of the information. And I only have an hour, so we really have to work hard to get all this information out. And two, talk too much, Shannon. And so she encouraged me to do an exercise, and I have encouraged other teachers to do this exercise, and I have never done it because I'm too scared. But here's an exercise you can try if you want. You can do a recording of yourself teaching an hour lesson, and then you can time how much of it you talk and how much of it they sing. And then you can weep to yourself silently, just like weep with the amount of talking. And one of the things that she also did, I will never forget this, one of the things that she also did was we were at one of the lesson observations after, I know, oof is right, is after the lesson, we talked about it, and she said, so I timed how long it was until the singer sang for longer than 15 seconds. And it wasn't until you were 40 minutes into the lesson that the singer actually sang for longer than 15 seconds. I was like, okay. Ouch! Ouch! So this is a thing. And it is a rudimentary kind of not very subtle. I know, Liz Jackson Hearns. It's so painful. I'm just putting it out there in real life so you can see, like, this is it's a rudimentary and really like a painful measure that is not necessarily indicative of effective teaching, right? But it is a very effective reminder. If you think about how long into the lesson, Seth says, when I was a new teacher, I talked a lot out of the fear that I was not qualified and had to show I was credible. Yes. And now years later, even with improved confidence, I'm having to put a lot of work into breaking those habits I've formed. I think for a lot of folks, it does start with that initial insecurity. Yes. Seth, yes. All I can say is yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. That so often we're in this position of teaching people who we're like, yikes, should I even be doing this thing? I don't know what I'm doing, etc. And that insecurity comes out as like, I'm just gonna keep telling you all the things I know, and then you'll respect my teaching. And also, when we're independent voice teachers, so often too, I mean, there is a similar kind of pressure in academic teaching as well, but I know more from independent voice teaching. So like, there's a similar kind of pressure for independent voice teachers as well, right? Like, they're paying us. We want to give them the most they can get out of their hour. It is very uncomfortable. I know this. I know this from my own self and my own teaching, and I know this from all of the teachers who I work with. It is very uncomfortable and goes against so many of our instincts to say to a singer, sing that 5 times through and stop when and notice which one is your favorite. And then to not give any more directives than that, and to not like stop them and say, oh, now add this thing, or oh, let's do this one other thing too, because I can hear that you're doing X, Y, Z. And then when they're finished singing, to not give feedback immediately, to not show them that we were listening, to have more silence from me in the lesson. Ooh, that is so uncomfortable. It's so hard. It's so uncomfortable. Because I feel like maybe I'm not giving them their money's worth. Ouch. It's really uncomfortable. person who's talking is the person who's learning. And it comes back to being me-centered voice. I become the center of the lesson versus the singer becoming the center of the lesson, and versus the singers being, I'll tell you what, the singers, so in the voice ped degree, one of the very first things we started to talk about, oh, Melissa, that's a really good point too. Let me pull that out in a minute too. One of the very first sort of principles we started to kind of talk about applying in the voice studio was the 3-second rule, which is the singer finishes doing an exercise, the singer finishes a song, the singer finishes doing something, and then we shut our traps for 3 seconds. We don't say anything. We look. We don't give any feedback. And then maybe we say, how did you experience that? How successful was that for you? Etc. We ask those kinds of questions, right? So at the beginning of the voice ped degree, voice teachers were like, my students are so confused right now. They're looking at me like, what is happening? Why aren't you talking anymore? Right? The students were like, what is happening? Because it was like a shock to their systems, right? Because the students were so used to, immediately after I'm done singing, the teacher tells me everything I did. Oops. Yes, for you. How did you experience that? Yeah, what changed for you? I think that's what you're responding to, right? And so then, now, we've been doing the voice ped degree for, oh my gosh, for like 5 months now. Oh boy. That's crazy. We're like farther through than, oh my gosh. We're over halfway through. What? The students in the lessons of the voice teachers who I work with are beginning to respond almost immediately. Almost without prompting. Many of them now respond without prompting. So they sing through something 5 times, and then they give themselves a second, and then they say, I think that I did XYZ section in a different way. I'm pretty sure that I had a better closure there, or like I was almost to where I wanted to be on that one. Can I do that section one more time? And blah, blah, blah. So the singers are starting now. They're getting used to the like 3-second rule where the voice teachers are not telling them what they did, and are not offering information, and are not telling them how to change it. And the singers are starting to be able to self-assess and to give feedback, and they sort of like articulate their feedback. So the teachers, not in all cases, but in many cases, those singers are starting to take on that. They're starting to move into that learning. Oh, it's so exciting. It's so exciting. And Melissa's saying too, this is also such a good point. I think the neurodivergence among us assume everyone else wants to know all the stuff that we know, and they don't. Yes, Lori, you're absolutely right. It's crucial in voice therapy. Yeah, absolutely right. And so let me come back to that in just a second. But Melissa, yeah, right. So often there's also, if you're teaching as a neurodivergent person, there is also this added kind of component where autistic people often, ADHD folks to some extent as well, but in a different way. But neurodivergent folks often will feel like either I know I like it's an uber focus for me, so I know a lot of stuff about this, right? And so I need to let you know the thing, right? Or B, I need to say the thing before I forget it. And that's a little bit more of an ADHD trait, and the autistic trait is a little bit more of like, I have all of this information, I've got a ton of information, and autistic folks tend to, not always, but often there is the component with autistic folks where I feel closer to you when I info dump, right? So info dumping, this is an actual term that we use. Info dumping is an actual way that autistic people feel close, that we feel like we're building relationship, right? So there's a relationship building factor there. So that can come in as a neurodivergent person who is teaching, right? So those two things. And so one thing that I say to folks who are saying the thing because they're afraid they're going to forget it, which is that's a different motivation, right? And often that's more associated with ADHD. If you're saying the thing immediately because you're going to forget it, take some notes. Write it down. Just like as they're singing, take a couple of notes, do a couple of shorthand notes, and just keep that in the back of your head. And then have a thing at the end of the lesson where you say, like, here are some of the things I noticed. Yeah? If you are someone who is where the compulsion to sort of info dump, and also that info dumping is part of your relationship building, right? It's part of your communication that makes you feel like you're close to the person. That's part of the relationship. A similar kind of thing to consider is when we're finished working on this aspect, I'd like to tell you a few things about it if you're interested. And or at the end of the lesson, I'm going to save aside 5 minutes at the end of the lesson where I can just, like, if you're interested, where I can just, where we can talk about this a little bit more. And I can give you more information on it. It's so exciting what I'm hearing happening. And I want to just, I want to make sure that we're on the same page on it. So you're allowed to like recognize that that's part of the impetus for why you're doing the thing you're doing, right? In terms of like giving that 3-second pause, recognize that why that is so challenging. And then it's your lesson. You can teach it however you want. And then make the time for it. Just say, like, hey, at the end of the session, I'm going to leave 5 minutes at the end of our session, and I'm going to write down some stuff as we go. And then at the end of the session, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I noticed. Or I'm going to do an info dump. If you're interested, let's do it. Yeah. So Lori, wonderful SLP Lori, Formby Sonnenberg, talking about how this is crucial in voice therapy too, right? Understanding and talking to clients about how they're experiencing the changes in their voice. And this is part of the thing too. Like I talk all the time about how teachers are trained and teachers have training and practicums and so often we don't have that in our even in our voice pedagogy training. Like we don't have that and lots of folks don't go to school for that and all that stuff. And I say like our classroom teachers, they get actual pedagogy training, but like SLPs get actual training on how to give feedback. Right? We don't get any training on how to give feedback. So we're just like, here's all the things that I noticed and here's all the things that you're doing, right? We just give all that feedback. But SLPs and medical professionals, folks who are working, and coaches get training, same thing, and therapists have all of this training on like, how do we give feedback? How do we support them in their own self-assessment journey? How do we support folks in their own learning journey, in their own self-assessment? We don't get that training, right? So this is part, and also, so then that comes back to like, we end up in these, in teacher-led teaching situations where we're just doing what we think is the right thing to do because nothing was modeled, we didn't get trained, no one made it explicit. And then we have SLPs, wonderful SLPs who are doing beautiful work, and then the singers come back to us in the voice studio perhaps, and then we're back to just like telling them what their voice is doing. Whereas in maybe in an SLP situation, you were able to work in an SLP situation in the clinic where they were figuring out for themselves. They're doing formative assessment for themselves. They're doing assessments on their own progress. And how do I know that is a more efficient way for me to produce that sound? How do I know that my breathing is working in the way that I want it to work, right? And then we kind of jump back in. So voice teachers, this has been almost an hour of me talking to you. So I have learned a lot. Because I'm the one who's talking. So I have learned a lot. And I appreciate your coming along for my learning journey where I can externally process. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Seriously though, folks, I hope that this is useful. And yeah, let me know what ways you're starting to, some of the things that I know, you know, it's impossible to like put all of these things in at once. It's not possible. Oh, I shouldn't say it's not possible. I'm gonna say it would be challenging to try to change all the things at once. You're so welcome, Lori. It would be challenging to try to change all the things at once, of course. But, you know, pick a thing. Could be the 3-second rule if you wanted to. Pick a thing and try it out for a couple of weeks. See what happens. Pick a thing. It could be the, how do you know you're warmed up? Could be that question. How do you know you're ready to sing? Could be that question, right? Could be a, what exercises do you want to do? Why? What do you feel it's going to be? How will you know that you have sung this scale enough times? Pick a thing, try it out for a couple of weeks. After you've tried it for a couple of weeks, it may then be instinctive. May not, but it may be. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking about this now. If you are interested in some of this kind of like, and working with me on a one-on-one thing, I'm just putting it out there, just putting a little seed out there. I am in the very near future going to be offering some VIP days. Keep your eyes peeled. Okay. Talk to you later.